Welcome. I'm Mia Charity from the CloseUp Foundation. We are so excited for today's conversation with the Starting Point's co-founders, Chris Evans, Mark Kassen, and Joe Kiani. I'm especially excited to share that we've partnered with Prince George's County Public Schools in Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. CloseUp and Prince George's County do a lot of work together, so I know firsthand that the students today will have lots of great questions for our special guests. Speaking of special guests, our two lawmakers joining us today are U.S. Senators Chris Van Hollenon of Maryland and Tim Scott of South Carolina. Also, a big welcome to our guests tuning in from all over the country. Thank you for joining us. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the co-founders of A Starting Point, Chris Evans, Mark Kassen, and Joe Kiani.
Hello.
Hey, thanks, Mia.
Good to see everyone.
Good to see you, Mia, and we can't see everyone else, but thank you all for watching.
Well, we just saw that amazing short video about ASP, and everyone watching at A Starting Point may notice a few updates. So before we dive into today's conversation with our lawmakers, Chris, Mark, Joe, tell us about the new engagement tools that are being launched and how students can use them for civics education. Mark, let's start with you.
Sure. I mean, kind of like that video said, when we started, the original idea was to be a source of information. And we thought we'd, be lucky enough to exploit some of Joe's work through his other philanthropic efforts to get people to talk to us, to give us some definitions of things that seem scary. But what happened over a period of time was a relationship was developed that we realized became a community. And the community was the joining of two places, the elected officials and the folks that elected them. And the interesting thing about doing things like this, as Chris used to say, we would fix and sometimes make this car on the road. You get a lot of feedback in real time. Some of it very passionate feedback. And the feedback that we got said that they really enjoyed being as close to their elected officials as possible. So we started to remake the site and add features where people could stay engaged in a deeper and more direct way. So now we're going to have functions like you can follow your rep directly. You can get information from your lawmakers and make feeds that can just follow a topic that you like or just follow your lawmaker. You can contact your lawmakers as well. And now, one thing we didn't think we were going to have before this, and it's sort of a necessary thing because of the pandemic, is events like this. We wouldn't have had so many, quite frankly. So now we have lots of events that go way beyond things that Chris and Joe and I do, things that you and your organization have done, things that Bridge USA have done. So we now have a place that people can get alerts to those events. They can watch them live. They can rewatch them. So we really expanded in tandem with what the community's asked, and we'll continue to do so. I think throughout the year, we're going to have an election hub that will come up. You'll be able to download all sorts of notifications around, the primaries and a lot of the things that that happen within any given political season.
Very well said, Mark. I'll echo that sentiment. That one of the exciting things is seeing the site evolve based on people engaging and that information we get back. I just love doing things like this and knowing that young people are not only using the site, but just getting engaged politically and making their voices heard. We did this site because I when I was younger, we didn't have something like this. And I think if you miss the political train, it's tough to get back on board, and staying engaged is how you see change. I think we can all agree that the last 20 years have changed so much. Things are changing so fast nowadays. And you young people, you are driving, you're steering us. So you guys staying engaged gives me hope and makes me feel really, warm and fuzzy.
Well, the one thing I'd like to add is, look, we seem like we have some problems, and yeah, some of them are big problems, but the only way to solve them is through small fixes we can each make. I call that micro fixing. Each of us have our own way, our own abilities, some more than others. But if we all did what we could do, we could make this work a lot better. And technology, unfortunately, has been used for a while for maybe the wrong way, maybe creating more division, more tribalism. But what we did here, I think, is uses technology to bring people closer, create a bipartisan approach to things, a civil approach to things. And And, I love how our technology doesn't make people want to say extreme things to get attention. The lack of the thumbs up, the lack of showing how many people have viewed each of the sessions, and ability to bring you right to the lawmakers, the people that each location people have voted for, to tell you what is going on with all the issues we're facing. And then you doing your part. You're making our site successful, and we keep expanding it because you're tuning into it and you're becoming educated. Our democracy, any good democracy, requires an educated and engaged citizenry. So the fact that you're educating yourself and you're going out and voting, and hopefully it's going to make the big problems slowly go away.
Can I add one thing, because that's amazing. I think it's a really important point to say, which is the real credit to this is the folks that have been showing up, and they have dictated the tone. Elected officials, in that video, the original video was, us knocking on doors, begging people to participate. People show up every day. We can almost not handle how fast we're growing. And that's because the folks who participate in the site, the folks who watch the content on the site, demand a certain way of receiving information. And it's a much more civil way to engage with civics. And we hope for that, but we don't have control over that. That is because of the people that watch the site, and therefore the people like the elected officials today who participate. So I just wanted to hammer that home, Joe, because that was a good point.
No, I think that's all wonderful. I think my favorite part of the site are the explainers, breaking down and making some of the information a little bit more bite-sized before you even get to some of the conversations that lawmakers have about some of those very big and important issues. So,
Chris and I were talking about one of those from memory.
I bet. Absolutely. Well, let's start to bring in our lawmakers. Joe, do you want to do the honors and tell us
two United States senators for today's program? Thanks for being with us, Senator Van Hollenon and Senator Scott.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And first, I want to introduce Senator Chris Van Hollenon. And of course, you got a lot of questions, but I hope you will answer later who's your favorite guitarist. But Senator Chris Van Hollenon was elected to represent Maryland in the U.S. Senate in 2016. He previously served in the Maryland State Legislature and later was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Senator Van Hollenon serves on the Senate Appropriations Committee, the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, and the Budget Committee. And Senator Tim Scott, it's great to have you with us. Senator Scott was born and raised in North Charleston, South Carolina. He is the first Black man to be elected to both the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate. As joining the Senate in 2013, Senator Scott has been a national leader on education, justice and fairness, workforce development, and opportunity for all Americans. His personal mission statement is to positively affect the lives of 1 billion people. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Good to be with you.
Welcome, Senators. Chris, Mark, and Joe, why don't we bring out some of our students with us today for a quick hello. Today is the second day of students returning to in-person learning for Prince George's County. So I'm sure that they are very excited to be here with us today.
Yeah, I bet. Well, as Mia mentioned earlier, we partnered with Prince George's County, Maryland for this event, and we have some great students here with us today.
Perfect. Today we're having a conversation about several issues that the students identified as being important to them: COVID, mental health, and criminal justice reform. Before we turn to their questions, Senators, are there any brief words that you'd like to share with the students to kick things off? Senator Van Hollenon, let's start with you first.
Well, thanks, Mia, and it's great to be with students from Suitland High School. It's an honor to represent Maryland in the United States Senate, and I'm a big believer in getting our high school students more involved and more engaged in talking about issues that are important to our communities and to our country. So thank you all for participating in this. And of course, thank you to Chris and Mark and Joe and all the folks from Starting Point for bringing us together today. I'm also honored to be joined by my colleague and friend, Tim Scott from South Carolina. We disagree on some things. We agree on a lot of things. That's why discussion, debate is important to our democracy and why we want to engage all of you as well. Just to give you an idea of working together, in the next day or two, we intend to introduce, the two of us, a bipartisan bill to help provide more help between the federal government and state governments to clamp down on financial fraud that's targeted primarily at senior citizens, at your grandparents and parents. About $3 billion a year people lose to pranksters and con artists. So that's just one example of something we're planning to do in this week. There are many others, but it's great to be with all of you to discuss the issues that you raised. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. And by the way, Joe, my favorite guitarist is Jimi Hendrix.
Oh, okay.
Jimi Hendrix. All right. That's a good one.
Very good. I expected something closer to your last name, but okay.
Oh, Van Halen ain't bad either.
Eric?
Awesome. Senator Scott, how about you?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to hang out with some very talented youngsters throughout the country and frankly in Maryland. I will say, as a kid growing up, I grew up in a single parent household, mired in poverty. I was disillusioned as a kid, sometimes angry, did not believe that my future was going to be bright at all. I had two major blessings. One was a praying mama who never gave up on me. She always taught me to shoot for the moon, and even if you miss, you'll be among the stars. And then I had a mentor who taught me that you could literally exceed your wildest expectations by taking responsibility for where you are. And I will say that those two came together for me in a wonderful way. It formed a foundation. And had it not been for that praying mama and that great mentor, I would not be here as a United States Senator. So I will just say this in closing to the future leaders of this country, that all things are possible. It doesn't matter where you start. It matters how hard you work. It matters how much you apply yourself. And in this country, unlike most countries on earth, you can exceed your wildest imagination. If I can do it as a kid who failed civics and now I'm a United States Senator, you can get there too. Chris was a cum laude graduate. I was a thank you laude graduate. So you have the full spectrum on stage today. I'll say this as well. Chris mentioned legislation that we're working on together. One of the myths that you hear on every major national media challenge is that there is no bipartisanship left in the United States Congress. The fact is exactly the opposite. About 85 to 90% of the things that we finish, we do together. And so you'll see the spirit of collaboration, hopefully in the next few minutes, but you'll certainly see it when this conversation ends and Chris and I continue to work on things that will help our seniors keep more of their money, as he described a few minutes ago.
Thank you so much. I think whether you're cum laude or thank you laude, you can still be a good citizen. So why don't we take some questions from our students? Chris, I think you have our first student.
Yeah, let's dive in. All right, our first student question comes from Kayla O. She's starting today's conversation on the topic of COVID-19 lockdowns.
Hi, my name is Kate Grade. My question is, do you think the pandemic and lockdown has affected people's mental health in a negative way or a positive way?
Mia, do you want us just to take them in order here?
Yeah, Mia, should we?
Go ahead, Senator Van Hollenon.
Great.
Okay, so first of all, Kayla, thank you for your question and raising a very important issue. Look, I do think that the pandemic has placed enormous stress on everybody. And all of you are students, you're in high school, having to navigate dealing with the pandemic. Some days you're in class like today, other days you're out. So we've all had to work hard to adapt. But I do think it's put a lot of stress on students and on families. And one of the things we've tried to do here in the Congress is to provide more resources to our schools, including Prince George's County school system, which has received a lot of federal funds to try to help support students and teachers as they get through this, and also to help close the learning gap that may have widened during this period of time. Also trying to provide more funds to allow for distance learning when necessary. But all of us do want everybody to be back in the classroom just as soon as possible. I'm glad you're able to be back today. And we just need to be working with one another. This is a time when we've really got to connect with one another, you as students, with teachers, with the rest of us in our community, because it is easy to get isolated, and it is easy as a result to get very discouraged. But as my colleague Tim Scott said, we've just got to keep working to move forward, and I'm confident that we will. We'll beat this pandemic, and we're already pulling out of it when it comes to people getting back to work and getting back to school.
Senator Scott.
Thank you. I didn't hear Kayla ask the question, but obviously the question's about the mental health as it relates to students, I believe is the question. I would say without any question, when you think about the impact this pandemic has had on our kids, it's a devastating impact. You think about the fact that we saw an over 30% increase in the emergency room visits because of mental health of our youngsters, a 50% increase in attempted suicides. The pandemic's impact on our younger generation might be more pronounced in mental health and suicide than it is in actually the virus itself. And so we do need to do the things that are necessary to keep our kids in school so that they can have the type of socialization that reduces the threat of the mental health challenges that we're seeing throughout the country. We do need to have our kids in school, as you see Republicans and Democrats joining arm in arm, as we saw the mayor of Chicago and the governor of South Carolina on the same page. Our kids are best when we follow the science, and the science around kids in school is clear, crystal clear. They are better off in the classrooms. Senator Van Hollenon made a really important point that the federal government, we have provided over $1 billion of additional resources to help our kids around the country be in schools. And we need to make sure that we have the tests that are necessary. The vaccine is an incredible opportunity to keep our kids in school and our teachers healthy, as well as focusing more resources on the support systems that are necessary for our kids to be as healthy as possible. What we can't afford is what we've seen around the country. I think in Chicago, one of the reasons why the mayor is so adamant about getting the kids back in schools, we lost 100,000 students were unaccounted for during the pandemic. That's unacceptable. She understands that, and the rest of the country does now as well. So thank you so much, Kayla, for the question.
Okay, so next question, Senator Scott, let's start with you. It's going to be coming from John May about school safety.
Hi, my name is Jimmy Womack, and I'm in the 10th grade. My question is, what are for improving safety measures for public education in the era of COVID?
Mia, can you repeat what?
I can repeat it for you if you couldn't hear it for some reason, Senator. So she asked what your top priorities were for improving safety measures for public education in the era of COVID.
Well, I think it's really important for us to focus on making sure that our kids have the necessary and our schools have the necessary things that make schools safer for them. Testing is an important part of it. The plexiglass that we see throughout the nation is also very important as well. We also need to make sure that they're in school. I mean, that's the number one thing we need to do, but we also have made sure that the resources that is important to deal with the pandemic is in the hands of the school districts to make the best decisions that they possibly can. The availability of the vaccine, I have I've taken both my Pfizer shots and the booster. I think there's no question that we are all better off having taken the vaccine. So that's an important part of keeping kids in school and keeping teachers and students healthy. So those are a few things. So to summarize it, number one, we provided more resources. Number two, we have the vaccine and making it available to school-aged kids, very important. And number three, the PPE and other things that are necessary for our kids to be able to stay in school. I visited school yesterday, as a matter of fact, and I will say that the kids were wearing their masks and teachers were wearing their masks. I had one on as well. So we know that there are ways to keep our kids healthy and in the school in person. So we can do those things.
Senator Van Hollen.
Well, you may not be surprised, but we're in disagreement, in agreement on all these things with my colleague. We did provide, again, substantial resources to our public school systems. Prince George's County, just in the American Rescue Plan bill that we passed earlier last year, so a little less than a year ago, provided $275 million to the Prince George's County school system. And we provided very flexible use of that money, including to purchase things like testing to screen, like masks and PPE. And I see a lot of our students are wearing masks here, like other access to other of the things that we need to make sure that we protect our students from the virus. I also second the need for everybody to get vaccinated. Who can get vaccinated and take the booster when you're able to do it. These are all measures that we should be taking so that everybody can be getting back to school, because I agree, we lost a lot of learning during the pandemic. I have to applaud our teachers and students and parents for all they did to provide for virtual learning when it was necessary. But now that we have these other tools, I think it is important that we get back to in-class, in-person learning as you are in Prince George's County today.
Thank you so much for those answers. Next, we have a question from Taiwo, who has a question about school vaccine mandate.
It's Taiwo Misore, and I'm in the 11th grade. My question is, what is your position on the federal vaccine mandates for school-age students?
Senator Van Hollen, let's start with you.
So I support the traditional approach here, which is that states and local school jurisdictions make decisions with respect to vaccines. In Maryland, for example, through the State Board of Education, we require Maryland students to be vaccinated against polio, against measles, against mumps, against rubella, and other diseases. And that is a decision made in the interests of student health by the Maryland, school board, and then other jurisdictions, other school jurisdictions within Maryland, like the Prince George's County school system, can make those decisions. I believe, for example, Prince George's County schools have said that if your students in sports in close proximity, then you need to be vaccinated, or you have the alternative of regular testing. But those are the kinds of decisions that I think are best left to the states and the local jurisdictions based on current conditions, based on what they themselves are experiencing.
I would say that this is an area where we probably have a different perspective. I think when you want to localize the decisions, that's a good idea. I'd say the most local decision maker is the one that you live with. And so I think families should make their decisions with their doctors and with their kids. At the end of the day, what we've seen is an incredibly low transmission rate. That doesn't make it zero, but that makes it very low. And so all the things that we should do, from being vaccinated and getting the booster, as Chris said, when it's available, is really important. But the best decision maker for the health of the child isn't a bureaucrat somewhere, whether it's a local one or a national one. It's the parents themselves. And I actually believe that the best option we have for our kids is the option in their households.
Let's switch gears for a second and talk about the possible reforms to our criminal justice system. For that, we're going to go to Pilar with our next question.
Hi, my name is Pilar White, and I'm in the 12th grade. My question is, what could the federal government do to reform the criminal justice and policing systems?
Senator Scott, let's start with you. I know you've been really involved in criminal justice reform issues.
Yes, ma'am. It's one of my more important topics as a kid. As I said earlier, growing up in a single-parent household in a community where violence was way too high, and sometimes the response times was too low. And so one of the things I've tried to work on in both the criminal justice reform and police reform is making sure that the communities that are at risk have a healthy relationship with the officers that serve within that community. I started around South Carolina doing listening sessions with African-American leaders and police leadership so that they were in the same room discussing the same issues with myself and a Congress member. For over a year, we did that around South Carolina. And what it did, it led me to working on police reform. And let me give you a couple ways that I think that we could improve the quality of the outcome for citizens, especially in communities of color. One is the elimination of the chokehold, except for the life of the officer. That is something that myself and Cory Booker worked on, and we actually came to an agreement on that point. We also, I've said that if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then video is worth 1,000 pictures. So making sure that our law enforcement officers have body-worn cameras and that they keep the data stored, making it available. You all may not remember, but about 6 years ago, 7 years this summer in Charleston, North Charleston, my hometown, Walter Scott, a namesake but not a relative, was shot in the back by a law enforcement officer who then lied on his police report. Had it not been for a bystander who happened to be walking by, who videoed the incident, and that video did not come out for a couple of weeks, we would have assumed that what the officer said was 100% accurate. After watching that video, Michael Slager was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. And thankfully, we had that video. So I am in favor of providing as much money as humanly possible to make sure that our officers have body-worn cameras. I'm also in favor of providing more resources so that we have the responsibility of the duty to intervene in situations like we saw in Minnesota that could have, I think, saved the life of George Floyd had the officers that were standing there actually intervene in the situation. The training for de-escalation could have helped in Kenosha, Wisconsin, in that situation. If the officers had the training to de-escalate the situation, that young man's life may still be here on earth. And so I look for other ways to gather the data so that we understand and appreciate the interactions that are happening between the law enforcement as well as the communities that they serve. So I believe there are a lot of things that we can do. I've been working on those things. But let me finish with this. It's not a binary choice between supporting police or supporting communities of color. If you want to do one, you have to do the other. And that's why resourcing it is critical. And thank you so much for this question. It's a really important question in the communities where I spent the vast majority of my life.
Perfect.
I agree. It's a fundamental question, an important question. And I want to applaud the Maryland General Assembly, including the state legislatures from Prince George's County, for enacting exactly the kinds of things Senator Scott talked about as a matter of Maryland law. So they enacted legislation to establish a use of force policy to prevent things like chokeholds. They also limited no-knock warrants to very specific situations. They also established an independent board to review complaints of police abuse. So that wasn't a decision made merely by other police officers, but you had other participants as a member of the review board. And they also passed legislation to require more transparency, where you could more easily obtain reports of a particular officer's misconduct so that that officer, if they'd been engaged in misconduct, couldn't simply go to another police station without them knowing about it. So we need to enact these and some other measures at the federal level. I want to applaud Senator Scott for all his work on this. There has been more agreement, I know, between him and Senator Booker on many of these items. There are still some areas of disagreement. I do hope at some point we'll be able to overcome those because I think it's important to move in this direction. I do want to mention one other issue, and I've spoken to Senator Scott about this, and I'm working with Congresswoman Karen Bass, a House member, on this, which is to create a system where when you get a 911 call that doesn't require a police use of force response, we should be able to have alternative responders. For example, in cases where it's a mental health situation, where the first person on the ground encountering that individual with a mental health situation should be somebody who's trained in mental health. And too often we've seen situations around the country where police encounter somebody with a mental health problem, the situation spirals out of control, and it results in an unjust death. So I do think we can make some very important reforms to how we police with respect to cases, again, that don't require a use of force response. And I am pleased that a lot of police departments are now working to try to establish these alternative response mechanisms. And I'm working very closely with the mayor of Baltimore and others within Maryland, including in Prince George's County with County Executive Alsobrooks on exactly these kind of things.
Well, if you don't mind me adding on to Chris's comments real quick, I think Chris hits on a really important point, especially given the first question of our discussion today around the mental health of our kids. The importance of having those co-responders to scenes where there's a mental health episode happening on the scene. Typically, a parent or a loved one oftentimes is calling the police to that scene. So there is an awareness of what you're walking into, and having that co-responder come to the scene is critically important. And I think what Chris has just articulated and laid out is something that we may see more of and not less of, especially as this pandemic continues to wind down. We'll still have the residue of the pandemic to deal with for years to come. So funding, providing grants and or resources to make sure that law enforcement departments have the ability to hire and to bring on these co-responders, I think is a critical component of what Chris just articulated that is so important to the folks on the screens today.
Those are great responses, really. But we're going to stay on this issue for one more question. Kayla W. has a question specifically about police accountability.
Hi, my name is Kayla White, and I'm in the 12th grade. My question is, police reform is needed, especially in communities where Black and brown people reside. How will you support the goal of accountability when police brutality is evident?
Well, let me first of all, Kayla, let me expand, I think, on some of the things we talked about, because I do think the measures that Tim and I mentioned are essential. And they move forward in Maryland through the General Assembly, and I'm glad we're working on trying to implement these on a national level. But so when you see police misconduct, we need to make sure that we have independent review boards that can make decisions rather than a system where it is just the police themselves that are making decisions about the actions of some of their colleagues. And I do think that's a very important part of it. I also think the United States Department of Justice has an important role to play here where there's clear evidence of problems with a pattern of abuse and discrimination in the practice of a police department. It's very important that the federal government have the tools to go in, as the Justice Department did in Baltimore, when there were clear indications of abuse, the kind of abuses that led to the unjust death of Freddie Gray. So these are other tools that we need to bring to bear to address this really important issue.
I'd continue down that same artery and recognize A part of the work that we've been doing on the police reform legislation I've worked on is the importance of the preserving of the records of those officers who have multiple infractions or who themselves have broken the law. And sometimes it's easy for an officer to go from a department to a different department to a different department, and those records do not follow. And some of the things that we have worked on in the legislation is to make sure that we preserve those records. And then in the previous administration, there was an executive order that included the formation of a national database for those bad apples that we've talked so often about, being able to be compiled in such a way that any new department or agency would have access to those records to understand who they're hiring. Believe it or not, today that is hard to find, as officers who have bad conduct in one department can move on to another one without those records following them. We need to stop that from being the case and start having a higher level of accountability embedded in the next hire as well.
Thank you so much for that. Let's go for our last question. Senator Scott, we'll start with you. It comes from Famata.
Hi, my name is Famata Mara, and I'm in 9th grade. My question is, how will we help people who are wrongfully imprisoned immigrate back into our society?
Senator Scott, let's start with you.
Well, thank you. One of the ways that we can deal with the recidivism rate of our nation, and frankly, what we've done in South Carolina, we've been able to close, believe it or not, 5 or 6 state prisons because we've been able to reduce recidivism. Recidivism is a fancy word that means nothing more than once you get out, you come back in a certain amount of time back into prison. And one of the ways you break that is through job training, through making sure that we have education components, as well as the mental health part of it as well. I've always said that people need a plan, a purpose, and a paycheck. And a part of the First Step Act that we passed in a bipartisan fashion about 4 years ago was focusing on those 3 critical areas so that nationally we can do what we've seen done in Georgia, Texas, and South Carolina, which is a significant reduction in the recidivism rate, those who come back. On a national level, federal prisons, it's about 3 out of 4 people are re-incarcerated within 5 years of getting out. In South Carolina, that rate is under 30%. So we're heading in the right direction. So if we can do what the states are doing and do it on a federal level by focusing on the mental health needs of the folks who are incarcerated, focusing on the education. Unfortunately, more than half of the folks who are incarcerated are basically illiterate, functionally illiterate. And then third, making sure that the job skills that are necessary to transition out and into a job, making sure that you're learning some of that before you exit. So those are ways that we can break the recidivism rate and make it easier for those who were incarcerated to reintegrate in the communities. And remember, typically where you come from, you return to. And so as I think about that as a real issue, for those communities like the one I grew up in, I keep thinking to myself, how do I solve a problem before it happens? And this is one of the ways that we make sure that happens.
Well, I think we need, criminal justice reform on the front end, and then we need to make sure that we provide the tools to help people have a second chance if they've been in prison. On the front end, I do think we need to reform our laws. We have way too many people who are locked up for nonviolent substance use related crimes, use of marijuana. I was glad to see Maryland years ago decriminalize marijuana, so we're not locking people up for use of that. But I do think we have a lot further to go in reforming those laws. The United States has way too many people behind bars for those kind of offenses. And as we've seen in the past, we had laws on the books where, for example, crack cocaine criminal penalties were much higher than for powdered cocaine, which clearly had a discriminatory impact with respect to who got locked up for use of drugs. So I also think we need to make sure, as Tim said, that we are providing opportunities for our returning citizens and make sure that they have the job training programs. And we've worked on funding many of them. Again, I want to applaud the Maryland General Assembly for a lot of the actions they've taken here. We want to make sure we have second chance Pell Grants so that those Pell Grants are available to people coming out of prison to help give them a chance to get the education and tools they need to succeed. We're also working, it's part of a bill, a bipartisan bill I've been working on for a while, and I hope to pass it. It's included in a measure that's pending in the Senate to allow people who've served their time to also access the tax credit that's available to everybody else for going to college. It's a college tax credit. Under current law, you're disqualified if you got locked up for smoking marijuana. These kind of things also continue to live with people unless we adjust our laws with respect to things like check the box and other measures. So my view is we need to make significant reforms. Again, in Maryland, they've made progress. I hope we will make more progress at the federal level on these really important issues.
Thank you so much to our students for all of those wonderful questions. We do have you for a couple more minutes. So I wanted to ask you about, we don't hear enough about bipartisan bills. So tell us a little bit about the bill you mentioned earlier that you're both co-sponsoring.
Well, this is a bill that is designed to address the rampant, fraudulent schemes that are targeted primarily at senior citizens. A lot of these fraudsters see senior citizens as particularly vulnerable, and they engage in all sorts of schemes to try to get people to give them things like their Social Security number, give them other personal information that allows them to then get into people's bank accounts, or they just have some great hoax, which sounds very believable and ends up with people being separated from their money by a fraudster. So Tim and I are working to work with the federal SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, to also work with state governments to provide more people with the tools to end this outright theft. It's $3 billion a year in theft. So this is something we're going to be working on together.
And
Senator Scott.
Yes, ma'am. I'll just go to another piece of legislation that was passed and is law that was worked on in a bipartisan fashion. Certainly, it's the thing that I celebrate the most, the Opportunity Zones legislation that we passed a few years ago. I will say that working with Cory Booker in the Senate, as well as House Democrats and House Republicans on a bipartisan piece of legislation to address poverty in the highest poverty areas of the country, we designated almost 9,000 areas of America to receive preferential tax incentives to attract more people to invest in poor areas. To date, we have over $70 billion committed to those areas. And the poverty rate, because in part of the opportunity zones, hit its lowest level ever recorded in 2019. Just 2 years after it had been passed. So there are a lot of things that we can do in a bipartisan fashion. The criminal justice reform bill called the First Step Act is another classic example of bipartisan leadership working together on behalf of our nation. I wish we had more conversations like this one with y'all across the TV screens in America, so people would have an objective opportunity to understand what Congress is doing for them and not just what Congress is doing to them. And so this has been a classic opportunity that needs to be seen on all the screens in households across America. So thank you all for your commitment to having both of us have a conversation and a dialogue about issues affecting you.
Thank you guys. Thank both of you, senators. I mean, you've been, I think I said off camera, you participated in ASP before there was a site. So you trusted what we are trying to do. We appreciate your constant commitment to sharing your time, to speaking directly to the folks who really want to hear these kind of dialogue in a civil way towards disseminating civics. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah, well
Thank
said,
you.
Mark. I mean, look, we all don't always see eye to eye, but as we heard over and over in DC, they don't do news stories about the planes that land. So I know you guys do get a lot done, and I really applaud your commitment to your constituents, to your commitment to the country. It's not an easy job, and I'm grateful you're doing it. Thank you for joining us today. And honestly, we couldn't do this site without folks like you. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank all the students at Suitland High School for participating.
Well, thank you for your questions. Great questions. A little intimidating, but that's what we deserve as members of the United States Senate. So thank you all, and great host as well. God bless.
Take care.
Thank you. Senator Scott, Senator Van Hollen, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, not only with the students from Prince George's County, but students and friends of ASP and CloseUp joining us from all across the country. We know you have important work, so poof, you're gone. Chris and Mark, you're still here with me, so that's great. So
We have nothing
we've got a
important to do,
couple.
so it's fine.
Totally fine. Free schedules. I think we're going to bring Joe back, and let's take a few questions from students about ASP.
Joe has important things to do, so he has companies and things like that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. You two have to get back out there and inspire us with your great work.
Well, welcome back, Joe. Let's take our first student question from Kendrick.
Hi, my name is Kendrick Cotton. I'm in the 11th grade. My question is, what would be 3 things to walk away with after visiting a Starting Point's website?
3 things?
I mean,
Mark?
Let's each take one. Chris, you go.
Okay, perfect.
I would say just familiarity with the site. I was going to say something closer to inspiration, but we don't even need to get to inspiration yet. Just an understanding, just a basic understanding. I think one of the main reasons people turn away from politics is because it's just confusing and daunting. And I think you don't realize that some of the things that you wish were different in the world around you can be changed through the politics, through political engagement. So I think the first step towards, achieving some of those things is just familiarizing yourself with the world of politics, the vernacular, the bills, the elected officials. Once you understand those things a bit better, you feel the confidence to engage a bit deeper.
Joe, what's yours? I'm gonna go last because Chris. I was gonna say
inspiration.
Mine? I was gonna say inspiration. No, I can't because Chris just all over.
You can say inspiration.
You go. I'll think of something.
Well, I think that our representatives are representatives of us, and I think thinking about that, 2 things. Most of the time, they're agreeable, and you can learn from them. I've learned a lot from visiting our site on topics that I did not expect to be so well explained. But also that, look, this world has been shaped by people, and you guys can shape it yourselves. Just like these people, while they're good, you're as good as they are. So you just have to educate yourself and take action out of kindness and know that you can change the world we live in. Look at Senator Scott, where he came from, what he did. So I think that's I think an important takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, I think Senator Scott, said something great at the end there, which was, they were a little intimidating, but we're elected officials, and that's kind of what we signed up for. And I think if I could ask one thing, that people realize that they have a part in this process, and if they could leave our site feeling that they have a way in which they could feel their power within the importance of them participating, then we'll have done at least a little bit of service towards helping things run better, and also continuing to demand the way in which people talk about these things. I think all of us sit home and we acknowledge that we have differences, but it would be great if we could explore those differences while having some empathy and understanding that people are different and not having to take everyone down while getting to the heart of these issues. And
I think those were all 3 of those things were fantastic.
I would have said inspiration, it would have been quicker, but then I really
you guys danced around it, so we'll count it as a bonus. Our next question comes from Ella.
Hi, my name is Ella Rose, and I'm in the 11th grade. What was your inspiration for a starting point, and why do you think it's a necessary resource?
Mark, do you want to go first? Is it about?
No, I want you to take it. She asked what your inspiration was, so you need to really do that one, I think.
Well, for me, I think, well, like I said, first it was about providing information to get people comfortable with politics. But one of the things that I've seen a lot lately, which I'm sure it's always kind of been this way, but it always feels like we're at the kind of nadir of something. But it's our ability to disagree, the way we debate, the way we converse, it's become so hostile and winning an argument is not the same as changing a mind. It's not the same as earning respect. The art of knowing you're coming to the table where everyone has their own perspective, and oftentimes there's the perception of injustice on all sides. Being aware of that and practicing debate in classrooms. Specifically, I mean, what I've loved about ASP is hearing that sometimes classrooms are using it as jump offs for discussion and learning what works, what doesn't, and how you want to feel when you're in a debate, how you want to be treated, and how you should treat other people. I think is an important art as we become kind of a little more tribal, and as social media gives us all types of information. It's important to make sure that we know how to speak to one another, even when we have big disagreements.
Agreed.
Mark, you want to take it?
No, I thought that was great. I agree.
Perfect. Let's take our last question from Riley.
Hi, my name is Riley Adam. My question is, how do you see a starting point being used in the classroom?
Well, I'll start off there. Hopefully, first of all, the interesting thing about tools like this is they get used the way people who use them want to use them. You have the best intentions of what you think something's going to be, but that's what's kind of great about this stuff. Even we did have this in the beginning. We put things out the way it made sense to us. And as we said at the beginning, or as I said at the beginning, the site itself has evolved and the look of it's evolved and the way we even put information on has evolved based on how people use it. So in the classrooms, people use it different ways. We have something called ASP Homeroom that's going to continue to roll out and get bigger and bigger, which Mia, you know much about because we're partners with CloseUp in it. And in that, this is packaged in a way where it's the beginning. It's a resource, but it's a window into other resources that CloseUp provides, because Joe and Chris and I are very proud of the ASP team and everything that they've all done and we've done with this. But we also aren't the experts. We're the window into the experts, which, CloseUp, you guys are, and the teachers are, and the school and the students are the ones who have to find the way to use these tools to both better themselves. So I think ASP Homeroom will be a big step in that direction, and it'll continue to evolve in terms of how they use, for example, counterpoints and debates, and how they use that within the schools itself, and how they use the explainers, and how the explainers are used towards larger reference guides that other people provide. And I could go on and on, but that's the beginning of it. And I only hope that it grows in which the way is most useful to the teachers and the students that use it.
Well said. Well said. I also kind of hope that it, aside from, learning how to debate and how to speak to each other and familiarize yourself with political jargon, but to know yourself a little bit more, to know what you believe, if that makes sense. I bad analogy, but I was raised Roman Catholic, and I'm not that now, but growing up, going to, CCD and Catholic school and that sort of thing, they at least provided a place to question things and have discussions and understand who I was and what I believed. So I think just having an environment that bends towards politics to let people understand where their passions are and the bills that they support. So I think, again, not just the things I listed earlier, but knowing who you are when you look in the mirror a bit more.
I love that. I think the essence of what drew me to finding you all and connecting and us partnering together is that the goal isn't to tell anyone what to think, but to give them the tools to make those informed decisions and calculate their own thoughts about the issues impacting our democracy. So thank you all for being part of this event today. We're excited from CloseUp to be joining you. And with that, that's the end of our program today. Thank you Chris, Mark, Joe, for facilitating such a wonderful conversation with our lawmakers. I want to give a special shout out to Prince George's County Public Schools. I know we mentioned Suitland High School earlier, but we also had the Academy of Health and Sciences be part of our student audience today. So thank you so much to both of our schools participating today. And finally, thank you to our audience today. We hope that you continue to follow along with ASP and CloseUp and get involved and get engaged and make informed decisions about these issues that face our democracy. So with that, stay tuned.
Thank you. And thank you, Mia. Sorry, you get one too.
You got to get one too. Thank you. Always.
Thank you, Mia.
We're so
wonderful. Thank you. That's the perfect place to end. So goodbye, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody.